My name is Iñigo Picabea, and I work for the Spanish National Radio, which is the Spanish public radio broadcaster, and I work on culture news. Now it's 7 years that I work in culture news, and before I was a London correspondent for the Spanish National Radio, and I covered several issues, politics, economy, culture, sports sometimes. And before that, I spent like 4 or 5 years in Madrid, but working also in foreign affairs news. So it's culture is in my last years in journalism. And about architecture, it's one of my fields in culture news. I speak and I tell the audience about stories about theater, literature, cultural politics as well. And architecture is one of the fields. But I have to say that I'm not an expert in architecture, of course, but I'm very, very interested in architecture, and I would say maybe passionate about that. Among the 7 radio stations of the Spanish National Radio, I think there's not a specific program about architecture. I think in Radio 3, which is the music and culture radio station for young people, there is a program focused on design and architecture, but it has more than that. So normally in the main radio station of all the group, I would say that architecture is like a story, a subject that appears sometimes in the news programs and in the magazines. But I have to say it's true that it's not the main culture story among all the culture stories. But I think we are opening the way to talk about more about architecture, not only in the news programs, in the hard news programs, but also in the magazines and in the culture program we have there, which is El Ojo Crítico, the critical eye, which is dedicated to culture. So, I mean, I try to open way to speak more about architecture. Well, El Ojo Crítico is a very veteran program of about culture in our radio. It's like 37 years old, I think so, and it's a daily program at 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. and it's very like a reference in culture news in the among all the radio stations. It's the only daily culture show among the Spanish radio stations. So it's it's a trademark. Let's say that. Let's put it that way. And my experience now between architecture and El Ojo Crítico goes this way: is that I have a monthly slot in this program about a Spanish woman in architecture from 1965 to 2000. So from the last years of the dictatorship to the democracy. So it's very interesting work that I make with an expert, academic expert in architecture and in gender issues. So we mix all of them and we talk about architecture and about Spanish women, which are not very well known, not only for the wider public, but also for the architects are not very well known. Maybe I was thinking that this slot, this section about women in architecture is a success story. I mean, if we can use Twitter as to measure the success, for example, where I normally upload the stories I make in the radio, this was, and it's quite successful. I mean, each time that I upload these stories about women in architecture, I mean, it has some retweets and faps, and it's quite interesting. And I think it's a success story because something that started with an interview in August when the audience is low, and suddenly it became a fixed section in a culture news program. And then another story that I was surprised when it was admitted in the hard news programs of our radio is the last EU Mies award to the building in Bordeaux by Lacaton and Basal. Even if it wasn't a Spanish architect awarded, which this time that helps sometimes to talk about architecture, but I mean the editors of the several news programs accepted that story, and they wanted to talk about this story. And I think that the link was the social issue of the project, because it was something about social housing and how housing is organized in Europe. So that made quite a success. The success was that the story was accepted by the editors to be told. I don't know, maybe stories about maybe heritage, which are sometimes linked to architecture, that I thought because of well, Spain has a lot of heritage, and sometimes you think that it's going to be accepted by the editors because it's heritage, it's even linked to Spain, but they don't see the interest of the story. So well, the good thing about that is that in the morning news program, I have a little slot of 1 minute every day. Well, from Tuesday to Friday, where it's very early in the morning, but I recorded it, and I talk about several culture issues, but one of them is architecture. So when I see that some of the themes or subjects are not accepted in the main news programs, I use this way to talk about them. Yeah, I think it's challenging for architecture to be included in the media, and even for the journalists that are interested in, is challenging to promote and to try to open way for it. Maybe it's I mean, unless are very clear stories like, let's say, Pritzker Prize, Mies Prize, or award for the Spanish journalist architect, sorry, or exhibitions about architecture in. Sometimes it's difficult because it's not seen always as a culture issue. Sometimes it's seen like very more technical issue. And the other things that I remember being in a round table as well, like this, similar to this in King Juan Carlos University here in Madrid. And it was about the language the architects sometimes use to explain their work. Sometimes very obscure, only for architects, and sometimes difficult to understand. It's true that the architects that were participating in that roundtable were very critics with their colleagues, saying that they must be, I mean, if they wanted to be more listened by the people, they have to try to be more clear for the journalist, and so the journalist can explain their work better.